You wake up, no buzz, no plans, no messages lighting up your phone, just stillness, just you. And that silence, it feels weird, maybe even a little uncomfortable. Then something soft starts rising inside a quiet voice, a feeling in your chest. Not because you're lonely, but because deep down you're wondering, do I still matter to anyone? That's the moment when most men break. They grab their phones. They text people they shouldn't. They scroll through social media just to feel something, anything. Because we've all been taught that silence means something's wrong. That if she's not texting you, if the group chat is quiet, if nobody's checking in, then maybe you've fallen behind. Maybe you're being ignored. Maybe you're failing. But what if that silence isn't something to fear? What if it's a doorway? A path most men are just too afraid to take. The truth is, we were raised to fear being alone. But no one ever explained what happens when you stop running from it. When you sit in that quiet and finally face yourself. When you stop trying to be everywhere for everyone and choose to just be. Because here's what they won't tell you. The man who walks alone on purpose, he isn't weak. He isn't lost. He's learning. He's building. He's becoming solid from the inside out. This message isn't for every man. It's for the ones who are tired of shrinking, tired of trying to fit in, tired of living a life that doesn't feel like their own. It's for the man who's done explaining himself. The man who's ready to stop running and start rising. We live in a loud world. Everyone's trying to prove something, to be noticed, to be liked. But the man who learns to be still, he becomes something rare, something powerful. Because this isn't about isolation. It's about transformation. You're not escaping the world. You're finally returning to yourself. Too many of us drift from one relationship to the next, one job to the next, one crowd to the next, always chasing attention, hoping someone will finally see our value. But when was the last time you sat with yourself in silence and asked, what do I really want? What would happen if you stopped chasing and started listening? Here's what happens. Your mind clears. Your values grow stronger. You stop needing to speak just to be heard. Your presence starts to say it all. And the real paradox, the moment you stop trying to be noticed, EDP, is when people start to notice. Before we get into the rest of this video, I want you to do one thing. Write this in the comments. I choose solitude to build strength. Don't write it just because it sounds good. Write it because you're done hiding. You're ready to stop performing and start becoming. This is your line in the sand. Type it. Own it. And in this video, we'll talk about how solitude can build real strength, how letting go of the need for approval can change your life, and how true clarity is only found in stillness. 1. The fear of silence. You sit alone in the dark, no messages lighting up your phone, no one asking for your time, no distractions to chase. Just you and your breath, rising and falling in a room so still that it almost feels alive. And for the first time in a long time, there's nothing left to hide behind. No background music to drown the noise in your head. No shallow conversations to keep you distracted. No woman's attention to reassure you, just silence. And in that silence, something ancient stirs. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of truth. Because the truth doesn't need to shout, it whispers. It echoes in the quiet, gently but relentlessly. It brings everything you've avoided rushing to the surface, every regret, every broken promise, every version of yourself you swore you'd become but never did. That job you didn't take, that dream you abandoned, that moment you betrayed yourself just to please someone else. Suddenly, they're all there, unfiltered, uninvited, unavoidable. And the real fear sets in. Not fear of being alone, but fear of meeting the man you've become when there's no one left to impress. So, what do most men do? They run, they scroll, they chase, they jump from woman to woman, goal to goal, just to avoid that mirror. Because stillness is brutal when you're not proud of who you are. But here's the twist. That same silence you fear is also the place where you find everything you've been missing. Why? Because it's the only space where the truth can breathe. And the truth is, your soul has been suffocating under the weight of constant performance. You've become addicted to motion not because you're building something, but because you're escaping something. And it's not her, it's not them, it's you. You've been running from yourself. But what happens when you stop running? When you sit still long enough to feel the weight of your choices, the pain of your avoidance, the echo of the man you promised yourself you'd become. At first it's chaos, your chest tightens, your thoughts spiral, insecurities roar louder than ever. You're not good enough. You'll never measure up. No one truly cares. You hear every doubt you've ever suppressed playing on a loop like an old broken tape. And yet if you stay, if you resist the urge to escape, you begin to hear something else, something quieter. A whisper behind the storm. It says, "You're still here." It reminds you that despite all the noise, all the mistakes, all the masks, you survived. You're still breathing. You still have time. And that's when something begins to shift. The fear that once paralyzed you starts to fade. Because those thoughts, they aren't who you are. They're echoes. Old scripts passed down by people who didn't know better. Fears inherited from a world that rewards noise and punishes depth. But you don't have to listen to them anymore. You don't have to open the door when they knock. You can sit in the fire and refuse to flinch. That's where the transformation begins. Silence doesn't shame you. It strips away everything that isn't real. It's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to free you. But freedom has a price. It demands honesty. It requires stillness. And most men aren't willing to pay that price. They'd rather stay busy than stay present. They'd rather be needed than be known. But you? You're different. You're here, still reading this, because you want more than a life filled with distractions. You want clarity. You want peace. You want power that doesn't come from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. And that kind of power can only be found in silence. It's forged in the moments when you sit with your fears and choose not to run. When you let the pain wash over you and realize it's not there to break you, it's there to build you. When you accept the fact that you cannot fix what you won't face. So ask yourself, what are you really afraid of? The silence, or what it reveals about you? Are you afraid that you've wasted time, that you've disappointed yourself, that you're not as far along as you thought you'd be? Good. That means you're awake, because only the man who sees the gap can close it. Only the man who faces the truth can rise above it. And here's the truth. You're not your failures. You're not the woman who left. You're not the job that passed you by. You're not the man who didn't know better. You are the man who stayed, the one who sat in the storm and didn't blink, the one who stared into the fire and saw possibility, not punishment. That's rare. That's powerful. That's Stoicism. True growth doesn't begin with books, or with podcasts, or with self-help videos. It begins the moment you stop running and face what's inside. It begins when you let the silence speak. When you let it unravel every illusion, every false identity, every story you told yourself just to survive. And when you finally stop trying to fill the void, when you simply allow it to exist, you reclaim something that most men never touch: inner command. Not confidence rooted in applause, but strength rooted in truth. A voice emerges from the quiet, not loud, not flashy, but solid, grounded, yours. And suddenly the world feels different. Not because it changed, but because you changed. Your energy doesn't beg to be noticed. It speaks before you say a word. Your presence doesn't demand attention. It commands respect. Not because you chased it, but because you finally stopped needing it. And that's the paradox. When you no longer seek validation, you become impossible to ignore. Because there is something magnetic about a man who is no longer afraid of being alone, a man who isn't performing, a man who doesn't need a crowd to feel valuable. He becomes the anchor in the storm, the one others look to when everything else falls apart. Because he did the one thing most men never do. He faced himself, not once, but repeatedly. He chose stillness over escape, truth over comfort, integrity over image. That's what makes him different. That's what makes him dangerous in the best way possible. He's not controlled by opinion, not swayed by noise, not shaken by silence. Because the silence no longer feels like emptiness, it feels like home. That's the foundation of Stoic strength. That's the core of masculine clarity. And once you touch that place within yourself, no one can ever take it from you. So the next time you feel the urge to run, to fill your day with noise, to numb out on screens or chase another meaningless interaction, pause, breathe, sit with it, don't look away. Because the moment you resist the instinct to escape, you begin to transform. That's when your real strength shows up. Not the strength to lift more or hustle harder, but the strength to sit still and see yourself clearly. That strength is rare. That strength is earned. And that strength is yours, if you're willing to stay in the silence long enough to hear what it's been trying to tell you all along. You are not broken. You are becoming. 2. Approval detox. Most men are addicted to something they never even notice. It's not alcohol. It's not drugs. It's not gambling. It's something far more deceptive and far more dangerous: approval. And the reason it's so dangerous is because it wears a mask. It pretends to be connection. It pretends to be ambition. It pretends to be love. But deep down, it's insecurity dressed in validation's clothing. You wake up and check your phone, not because you're expecting a critical message, but because you're looking for a digital pat on the back. Did she respond? Did they like my post? Did someone notice me? You're not alone. You're just looking for a sign that you still matter in someone else's world. And what makes this addiction so deadly is that no one calls it out. There are no interventions for approval seeking. No rock bottom moment. No friends pulling you aside to say, you're losing yourself trying to be liked. But the consequences are very real. You begin to shrink. You lower your voice to match the room. You say yes when your soul is screaming no. You avoid truth, avoid stillness, avoid confrontation, not because you lack conviction, but because you're afraid of rejection. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You nod along to beliefs you don't share. And little by little, you trade your authenticity for acceptance, your power for applause, your purpose for belonging. And here's the worst part: it works. For a while, you fit in. You get the likes. You get the attention. You even get invited. But deep down, something feels off. You look in the mirror and don't recognize the man staring back, because he's not real. He's a mask, molded by the approval of others, not by the truth within. So the question becomes, are you living a life you chose, or one that was chosen for you by your fear of not being liked? How often do you compromise your standards just to avoid conflict? How often do you stay silent just to keep the peace? You tell yourself you're being smart, being kind, being patient. But really, you're being invisible. You've trained yourself to be so agreeable that you become forgettable. But the truth is, the version of you that plays small will never feel fulfilled, because no amount of external validation can fill the void of internal abandonment. When you abandon your voice, your values, your truth, nothing outside of you can make up for it. Not a relationship, not a title, not even success. You'll always feel hollow because you're living on borrowed identity. That's why men burn out. Not because they're weak, but because they've been wearing a mask that was never made to last. And those masks, they get heavy, they crack, they break. And when they finally fall, what's left? A man who never got the chance to be himself. A man who doesn't even know what he believes anymore, because he spent years trying to reflect what others wanted to see. But there's a different path, a harder one, a lonelier one at first, but a real one. It starts with a detox, not from sugar, not from caffeine, but from approval. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes. You stop reshaping your words to match the mood of the room. You stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I want from myself? You stop pretending. You stop apologizing for having standards. You stop shrinking just to be digestible. And it's hard. The first few days feel like withdrawal. The silence becomes louder. The voices in your head multiply. What if they don't like me anymore? What if they talk behind my back? What if I lose people? And the answer is, you might. You might lose the people who only liked the version of you that catered to them. You might lose the friends who were never truly your friends, just spectators to your performance. You might lose the applause. But what you gain in return is worth every ounce of discomfort. You gain your voice. Not the voice shaped by trends or filtered by fear, but the one that was buried under years of pretending. A voice that speaks truth not for recognition, but because it must be spoken. You start to notice the shift. You don't laugh when it's not funny. You don't say yes just to avoid confrontation. You don't explain yourself to people who never cared to understand you in the first place. You begin to protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. You start honoring your time, your energy, your space. You stop trying to impress and start trying to align. And people notice, they sense it. Something about you feels grounded. You carry yourself differently. You don't walk into a room needing attention, you bring presence. And that's what separates you from the crowd. Approval-seeking men blend in. But men who choose themselves, they stand out. Not because they shout louder, but because they've stopped whispering their worth. Think about this. When was the last time you did something just because it felt right? Not because it was popular, not because it made others comfortable, but because it was true to you. When was the last time you stood firm in your values even when it meant standing alone? That's the power of an approval detox. It teaches you to stand even when applause is absent. It teaches you that solitude is not punishment, it's preparation. Because in that space, your real self rises. And he's not desperate. He's not performative. He's not begging to be liked. He's solid, intentional, magnetic, because he's aligned. He knows what he believes. He knows what he will and won't tolerate. And most of all, he knows who he is when no one's watching. And yes, the cost is high. You will lose people. You will lose comfort. You will lose temporary validation. But what you gain is everything you've been searching for in others but never found, self-respect. Not the kind you demand, but the kind that's earned through alignment. Peace. Not from hiding, but from standing. Power, not from controlling others, but from becoming untouchable by opinion. That's when your life begins to change. That's when your circle gets smaller, but more meaningful. That's when your decisions become clearer. That's when your mornings feel lighter. Because you're no longer living for the crowd, you're living from your core. And when you operate from your core, you don't need to be liked. You need to be real. That's the shift. That's the liberation. That's the man the world needs more of. So ask yourself, honestly, are you still shaping who you are to make others comfortable? Are you still addicted to being liked? Or are you ready to choose yourself? Not in theory, but in action. Because once you do, once you really do, everything changes. You stop chasing conversations. You stop performing in relationships. You stop needing to be understood. You just become. And ironically, that's when the world finally starts to see you, not the mask, not the act, but the man underneath it all. The one who no longer waits for permission to be himself. The one who doesn't bend just to belong. The one who leads from within, even if it means walking alone. That's not rebellion. That's clarity. That's power. And that's the path you were born to walk. 3. Clarity through solitude. There comes a moment in a man's life, quiet, often unplanned, where the noise finally fades. The phone stops ringing. The weekend is wide open. No one's asking for your time. And in that moment, something unsettling happens. Not fear, not excitement, something else. Stillness. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's heavy. And in that stillness, for the first time in years, you start to hear something that's been waiting beneath all the noise. Yourself. At first, you might not recognize the voice. It's not the one you've been using in public. It's not the one you show on dates, at work, or in your carefully curated social media posts. It's older, wiser, honest. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't beg. It simply asks, is this who you really are? And if you sit long enough, if you resist the urge to drown it out, you realize the most uncomfortable truth of all. Most of your life has been built around avoiding that voice. You were so busy reacting, adjusting, people-pleasing, performing, that you never stopped to ask, what do I truly want? What do I actually believe? Who am I when I'm not trying to be liked, accepted, or admired? Solitude strips you of distractions, but that's where its power lies. Because clarity doesn't come when you're performing. It doesn't show up when you're multitasking. It doesn't appear while you're scrolling. It comes when you stop moving, when the noise dies down, when there's nowhere left to run. That's when your vision sharpens, not outward, but inward. You stop looking for the next thing to chase and start questioning why you were chasing anything to begin with. You begin to realize that the goals you once thought were yours were actually borrowed, from society, from family, from friends, from fear. You were chasing money not because it brought you joy, but because it earned respect. You were chasing relationships not because they gave you peace, but because they made you feel wanted. You were chasing status not because it reflected who you are, but because it distracted you from who you weren't. Solitude burns through the illusions. It peels back the layers, and when it does, it doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. That's not a breakdown. That's a breakthrough. You start noticing how reactive you've been, how you've lived your life by other people's timelines, how you've adjusted your behavior to make everyone else comfortable, all while sacrificing your own inner peace. You've said yes when your gut screamed no. You've laughed in rooms where you felt like a stranger. You've tolerated friendships that drained you just to avoid being alone. But in solitude, none of that survives. Because there's no audience to impress, no social mirror to reflect back a false sense of worth. There's only the raw, unfiltered you. And if you sit with that version of yourself long enough, without judgment, without distraction, you'll begin to see him not as broken, but as becoming. Because solitude doesn't judge. It doesn't criticize. It simply clears the fog so you can finally see the road you were meant to walk. But here's where most men falter. They interpret silence as failure. They confuse stillness with stagnation. They think if they're not producing, achieving, or being seen, then they're falling behind. That's the lie. The truth is, when the world grows quiet, the real work begins. The internal work. The kind that can't be posted online. The kind that doesn't come with applause. The kind that builds a man from the inside out. In solitude, your habits confront you. Your values are tested, your standards are redefined. And slowly, something beautiful happens. You stop faking it. You stop pretending you're fine with things that make your soul uneasy. You stop tolerating relationships that feel empty. You stop saying yes out of fear and start saying no from power. And for the first time in a long time, you feel aligned. Not because your life is perfect, but because you're finally being honest about what matters to you. You begin to ask better questions, not, what will they think of me? But do I think highly of myself? Not, how can I fit in? But where do I belong? Not, what should I do next to get ahead? But what would make me proud to look in the mirror? These are not easy questions. They take time, they take pain, they take courage. But they're the only questions that lead to a life worth living. Because clarity doesn't give you a map, it gives you a compass. It doesn't hand you a to-do list, it reveals your true direction. You begin to make decisions not based on fear, but on freedom. Not based on pleasing others, but on protecting your peace. And once you taste that kind of peace, you'll never go back. You'll stop asking for permission to be yourself. You'll stop explaining choices to people who only loved your compliance. You'll stop bending just to keep shallow connections alive. Because when you're clear, your life becomes a filter. What's real stays. What's fake fades. Your routines begin to reflect your goals. You no longer wake up dreading the day. You wake up with purpose. Not because everything is easy, but because everything is intentional. Your mornings feel sacred. Your nights feel earned. Your boundaries stop being flexible. They become sacred lines drawn not out of anger, but out of deep respect for the man you're becoming. And here's the thing, clarity through solitude isn't about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to stand firm. You were never meant to constantly prove your worth. You were meant to live in such a way that your presence speaks louder than your explanations. And that starts by stepping back from the crowd, by turning down the volume, by trusting that the man you are when no one's watching is more than enough. And yes, solitude can feel lonely at first. But loneliness and solitude are not the same. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself. One is a void, the other is a foundation. And the deeper you go into solitude, the more you realize you're not alone. You're finally with the only person who can truly change your life, yourself. You begin to rebuild, not from pressure, but from clarity. You stop copying blueprints handed to you by others and start designing your own life. Not out of rebellion, but out of responsibility. You become deliberate. You become grounded. You become the kind of man who walks into a room and doesn't need to announce his value. He radiates it. Because it's not rooted in noise. It's rooted in alignment. And when people try to challenge your peace, when they misunderstand your silence or mistake your stillness for weakness, you won't react. You won't explain. You won't defend. Because you'll understand something most never do. Clarity is a form of power that doesn't need to shout. It just is. People may walk away. They may criticize you. They may try to pull you back into their chaos. But none of it sticks. Because your decisions are no longer dictated by insecurity. They're governed by vision. You're no longer trying to be everything to everyone. You're focused, disciplined, centered. And that kind of energy, it's rare. It's magnetic. It's unshakable. That's the gift solitude gives to the man who dares to sit still and listen. If your world feels quiet right now, don't panic. Don't confuse the silence with emptiness. That stillness you're feeling. It's not the end of something. It's the beginning. It's an invitation, a chance to finally meet the man behind the noise. Because the truth is, you've spent too long performing, too long adjusting, too long trying to be what everyone else needed. And now that it's just you, no audience, no distractions, you get to discover who you really are. That's not loneliness, that's liberation. You don't need more applause. You don't need to be constantly seen, liked, or validated. What you need is more presence, more intention, more moments where the external fades and the internal comes into focus. That's where clarity lives. That's where discipline grows. That's where real strength is built. Not the kind that flexes for attention, but the kind that stays solid when the world goes silent. You don't need to chase anything right now. You need to listen. You need to rebuild. You need to choose yourself, not because no one else did, but because you finally realize you're worth choosing. The man who walks alone isn't weak. He's refining. He's removing everything that no longer aligns with the life he wants to live. He's not escaping. He's evolving. And when that man reemerges, when he speaks, moves, decides, it's not for applause. It's from alignment. He's not looking for approval anymore. He's embodying purpose. And the world? It notices. The right people stay. The wrong ones fade. Opportunities don't have to be chased. They start finding him. That's not luck. That's a byproduct of clarity and inner command. So if something in you has awakened while listening, don't scroll away. Instead, ask yourself one honest question. What's one distraction I'm ready to let go of today? Drop your answer in the comments, not because you're performing, but because you're declaring something. And if this message stirred something real in you, hit like, not for entertainment, but because you're done hiding. And subscribe, not for noise, not for popularity, but to build a life grounded in discipline, purpose, and quiet strength. Because here, we don't chase approval. We rise in stillness and lead from within.